Good morning, class. Welcome to 8th grade history. And today we're going to talk about something that keeps on piling up. How many of you have played the game Jenga? How many of you love to play the game Jenga? I love Jenga. The reason I love Jenga, though, is not the building and it's because when all these little things start piling up, it gets out of balance and eventually it starts falling down. That's my favorite part. My favorite part is watching all of it fall down. And sometimes we have a day like that. Sometimes we just have a bad day. How many of you have had a bad day? Is today a bad day? Okay, good. Hopefully not. And if it is, then we'll make it better throughout this class. But I want to tell you about a bad day I had. I woke up one day and this is the hair that I had. I looked in the mirror, I said, oh boy. So I ran to my sink, I started batting my hair down, getting looking presentable, and then I went to school. And I went to school and the traffic was just like this. And I thought only one thing could make this better, and that's coffee. So I went to the holiest of all places, Dunkin' Donuts, and I went and got a coffee, and it was lukewarm. I literally drank it, I went, psh, I can't drink this. This is lukewarm coffee. And so the day just kept getting worse and worse. I didn't have my devotions that day. I went out to school and I got demerits, and just the whole day just went wrong. But today we're gonna be talking about the colonists. The colonists, at this point in time, are having some bad days. But let's do some review. So last time we were talking about this man right here. Does anyone remember who this man was? Ben.
King George III?
King George III, correct. And King George III, when he came to power, he had one thing on his agenda. Does anyone remember what was on his agenda? What was it, Chandler?
Gain more power.
Yes, exactly. So he said, you know what? The crown doesn't have enough power. The crown used to have so much power that when they would get into power, they would say, God put me here, so I can do whatever I want. You guys are my slaves, and I am the person who's on top. And that just made sense to them. But with a certain document, that all went away. Or it started to go away. Does anyone remember? I'll give you a hint. 1215 is the year. Does anyone remember what document was made in 1215? Mallory?
Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta, right. So the Magna Carta started giving rights, taking them away from the king and giving them to people, giving them to parliament, giving them to other people besides the king, really. And then there was something else that happened. And we talked about this last class period, the French and Indian War, right? The French and Indian War took a lot of money. The French and Indian War took a lot of casualties. It just was a big strain on the country of England and the English Empire in general. But at this point in time, England has gotten itself a new prime minister. The new prime minister, everyone have a round of applause for the new prime minister, George Grenville. George Grenville, he came in and he said, oh boy, I got a mess to clean up. I have so many things with this war that just happened, I need to start getting to work. So the first thing that he did was he made something called the Proclamation of 1763. So this is a map, this is the map of, these are the colonies, right? Does anyone know what this would be? These would be called territories, right? And these territories were given by England, and they said, okay, colonists, you can go to these territories and you can start settling here. But after the French and Indian War, they were more hesitant. They said, this is where the Indians live, this is where the French live, and we really don't want you guys going over there because all it takes is one gunshot, one fight, and we have another war again. And they did not want that. So they said, guys, we want you to stay on this side of the Appalachian Mountains. We don't want you going over to where the French and the Indians. And then the second thing that Grenville did was he started taxing them. And that's all fine and good, but there was a problem with that. What is taxation without representation? Why would that apply to this situation? Does anyone know? Why would did the colonists have representation? Were they considered citizens of England? Does anyone know? Or were they had to do whatever England said? Well, really, when they were being taxed, they didn't have anyone. They had one person who could sit in Parliament, and that person just had to sit there and say, okay, this is good, okay, this is bad, but they really had no say on what the actual policy was. So these things are all little things, right? It's a little thing to say, okay, you can't go over there. It's a little thing to say, okay, please just give us some money. And there's more stuff though. The Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a law that was passed that basically just put a tax on anything that had to do with business. So that would include, what would you need for business? You would need stamps, right? Of course, by the name. Letters, government documents, like taxes, tax forms, or for anything like that, just anything that had to do with business, they were starting to be taxed. Now that's all fine and good. That has to do with the taxation that we just talked about. But the really bad part was if they disobeyed this act, they were taken away their right to a trial by jury. Now, where do we find that? Where was that right to a trial by jury introduced? It was that same document that Mallory mentioned. Chandler.
It was the Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta, exactly. The Magna Carta said you can't just send people to prison because you don't like what they're doing. You have to give them a trial by their peers, a trial by jury, and this was taken away by the Stamp Acts. They said if we find you guilty, you're guilty. The next one was the Quartering Act. Now the problem with this was, like I said, the French and the Indians were still over in the colonies, right? And so the British said, hey, we need some people to protect you, right? So we're gonna send some troops over there just to protect you guys, but I mean, you need a place to stay, right? You need a place to stay if you're gonna be in a colony where you don't have a home, you don't have anything. So they said, guys, we just need you to provide a home for these guys. We need you to provide a home, food, and just take care of these soldiers, really. What could be wrong with that? We see that some of the British soldiers were criminals. So Aaron, if you are gonna have people staying in your house, and let's say you have a wife and kids, you're not going to want criminals to be in your house, are you? No, you're not going to want that, especially if you have daughters who are young and vulnerable. You don't want grown men who are not known for their good behavior to be in there. So these are all little things that just kept piling up until the colonists said we need to respond. So they did something called the Stamp Act Congress, where 9 of the 13 colonies gathered together and they said, King, we're having some problems. We're having some problems and we need you to do some things for us. They said the first thing is we need representation in Parliament. What was the problem? Why would they want representation in Parliament? Why would they feel like they deserved that, Chandler?
Because they had little to none.
Right, exactly. And they were also being taxed, right? Taxed. Mallory, you had it on the tip of your tongue, I apologize. But they were being taxed, but they didn't have any representation. So that was the first thing. They said, give us representation. Then they said, if you don't give us representation, that's fine, but give us control of our taxes back. You can't tax us without letting us be represented. And so they said, give us one or the other. And then another thing they said was, listen, you can trust us. Give us the land grants back. We'll protect ourselves. You don't have to worry. We're not going to fight any Indians. We just want to expand. We want more land to own. And so that is what they petitioned for. All fine and dandy, right? They had an issue with their authority, and they asked him. They were polite, and they said, listen, these are the things that we're having your trouble with. And sometimes we're gonna have issues with our authority, right? We're gonna have issues whether it's with me, whether it's with the principal, whether it's with your parents. No matter who it is, there's always gonna come issues. There's always contention because we're all humans. Let's read Hebrews 13:17 together, okay? Everyone, begin. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. So the Bible says here, you're not always going to agree with your authority, but we are called to obey them. Now, does that mean we're always called to understand? Does that mean we're always called to agree? No. The word obey here literally means trust. It means trust God because God has put them in that place, whether it's your parents, whether it's your government, whether it's your teachers, whether it's your principal, no matter who it is, God has put them there. So we're not called to agree with them. We're called to trust them and to trust God, really, ultimately. So we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that in our homework tonight. Did the colonists do the right thing in petitioning their authority? Was that right? Was that wrong? And we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And then we're going to talk about the response. So Stamp Act Congress, they said we want right, or we want representation, that's good. If we don't get representation, we want the power to tax, right? They said we either need taxation or representation, one or the other. And then they also said we need our land back, right? We want our land grants back. So let's see how the King of Parliament responded. They wanted to keep power. They said, listen, King George was like, I'm all about keeping the power. I want as much power as I can get, and giving you guys your rights is not going to get me any more power. Parliament said, listen, we're able to tax you, we're getting revenue, we're paying back our debts from the war, and we really just can't afford to give you representation or more your power of taxation. It's just not going to work out. So they were arguing, they were yelling, they were talking about different solutions, and there were a couple voices of reason. There were some voices of reasons, and the two men in particular are William Pitt and Edmund Burke. They said, listen, America, the colonies are a lot bigger than us, and if they don't want to obey us, they're probably not going to, because the size differential, they don't have to obey us. They said, especially William Pitt, he said, let's give them some of what they want. We can do other things, but we definitely need to give them some slack. And those are some people that make a difference. You can make a difference. We can make a difference. George Grenville made a difference, and these two men made a difference. People make a difference in history. So Parliament nullified the Stamp Act. Yes, we got what we wanted. The colonists are all good, but they also passed the Declaratory Act. What is the Declaratory Act? The Declaratory Act called the colonies subordinates to England. That doesn't sound very friendly. That doesn't sound like something good. It also gave Parliament the authority to bind the colonists in all cases whatsoever. Basically, whatever we want you to do, we're going to make you do. So how did the colonists respond? You would think they would respond, like, oh no, we didn't get what we wanted. But they actually were fine. They said, listen, we got what we wanted. It was a little off, but that's okay. We'll talk more about that later, more about their response. But for tonight, for homework, if you guys write a short 150-word essay on how the colonists handled their grievances, whether they're right or wrong. And then also we have a test tomorrow, so do your chapter review. We'll review that. So you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you for coming.